being separated from the parents. I don't like it. I hate it. But that's a Democrat bill that we're enforcing. We can change it in one day. All they have to do is come and see us. I can't hear your question, Don. Too much competition. Go ahead. No, you're not prepared. I can't believe she's not prepared. See, they're shocked, right? We'll bring it up. Yeah, we'll bring it up. What are you going to do for 20 hours on the plane? I have work. I have about 15 boxes of work. I will be able to work without being bothered by phone calls where you people are writing fake stories about me and we have to respond. Now, seriously, I mean, I have a lot of work. It's on the plane.
Trump talking to press.
Are you worried at all about the things that Rudy's saying in Israel? Is it giving you any headaches?
Look, Rudy's great, but Rudy is Rudy. But Rudy is doing a very good job. Excellent. Doing a very good job.
Rudy's Rudy.
He said what?
He said that being a porn star is not respectable work.
I'm not going to disagree with him on that. I can't hear a word he's saying.
Was Dennis Rodman invited to North Korea?
No, he wasn't, but I like Dennis.
Dennis Rodman.
A great rebounder. You know, when you think Dennis was a great rebounder and he wasn't, relatively speaking, that tall. So that tells you, you know, there's a rebounding, there's a genius for that. Dennis Rodman was a great rebounder. One thing we are thinking about, speaking of sports stars.
Here we go.
The power to partner is a beautiful thing. You got to get it right. You got to get the right people. I am looking at Muhammad Ali, but those are the famous people. And in one way, it's easier and people find it fascinating. But I want to do people that are unfairly treated, like an Alice, where she comes out and there's something beautiful. What I'm thinking to do, you have a lot of people in the NFL in particular, but in sports leagues, they're not proud enough to stand for our national anthem. I don't like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say to them, instead of talk, it's all talk, talk, talk. We have a great country. You should stand for our national anthem. You shouldn't go in a locker room when our national anthem is played. I am going to ask all of those people to recommend to me, because that's what they're protesting, people that they think were unfairly treated by the justice system. And I understand that. And I'm going to ask them to recommend to me people that were unfairly treated, friends of theirs or people that they know about. And I'm going to take a look at those applications. And if I find, and my committee finds that they're unfairly treated, then we will pardon them or at least let them out.
Will you invite them to the White House for a roundtable about church?
You know,
There's every black person that's in prison for a nonviolent drug offense. So I can give you a list today.
I'm just saying, for the leagues, if they have people, if the players, if the athletes have friends of
tweet it at them,
people that they know about that have been unfairly treated by the system, let me know.
Everybody else is looking like, why is he saying this? They're showing the staff.
That becomes celebrity advocates.
They are traumatized. Look at Stephen Miller.
They've seen a lot of abuse and they've seen a lot of unfairness. So if they have, how do you like that idea?
Look at Sarah. Sarah's like, oh my God, I'm resigning. I'm getting out of here. Did she?
Oh, no, I have the absolute right. I don't have to do it. Never did anything wrong. And you know that better than anybody.
Are you concerned about reporters sleeping?
Yeah, somebody said, what did Muhammad Ali?
I think you have a double edge. Reporters can't leak. You cannot leak classified information. At the same time, we need freedom of the press. But you cannot leak. Like Hillary Clinton did, like Comey did, you cannot leak classified information. If you look at the young sailor, Saucier, I mean, he went to jail over not classified, a much lower level. And
Bring
it's
it up.
very
It went
unfair
down.
that he goes to jail and that Comey's allowed to do it all over. Very unfair. Thank you much. I'll see you in Canada.
All right, Trump. He wants NFL athletes to let him know people who've been unfairly treated. That audio courtesy courtesy of MSNBC. So yeah, flood him. You all know people need to be who've been mistreated by the justice system. Tweet at him at Real Donald Trump. Okay, I know you looking like, now how we gonna go from that talking about your book? You probably as much shock as I'm in.
All tied together.
Boy, let's do it. Let's tie it together. Happy to have with us, and I love this book, A Card for My Father, about a little girl who's been given an assignment in school to write a card, Father's Day card, to a father she's never known. And this is not an uncommon reality for a lot of young people. A Card for My Father by Samantha Thornhill. You all can see that right there. Be sure to get Samantha is right here with us. Samantha, good morning to you. Thank you for coming in.
Hi.
It's always appreciate people take time to come in early in the morning when you could be somewhere else, you know.
Well, I'm about to be. I'm about to take a trip to D.C. I have all my stuff downstairs. And my
Oh,
son.
really? What you going to
So
DC for?
I
The
have
book?
a reading at East City Bookshop at 2:00 on Saturday.
Okay.
I'll be reading from this book.
Oh, outstanding. Well, congratulations on the book.
Thank you so
This is not
much.
your first children's book.
It's not. It's my third.
The one was about Odetta, right?
Yes.
And what was the other one about?
The other one was based on the hit series Everybody Hates Chris. So
Yeah.
It was a chapter book. Everybody hates school presentations.
That's great. How'd you get involved in children's writing? How did that get started for you?
Well, writing poetry is the root of everything. I started writing poetry when I was 12. I was very serious about it as a young person. I traveled through school, and then I ended up at a writer's retreat called Soul Mountain. It was run by the poet laureate of Connecticut at that time, Marilyn Nelson.
Mm-hmm.
She's a children's writer. And I started looking at some of the books on her shelf, and I saw that she was writing a lot of children's books in verse and using poetry and like marketing it to a children's audience. And that was very inspiring for me and very eye-opening. So I would say that she, as well as a young adult author named Tanya Hegeman, really set me down this path of writing for children.
So tell us about A Card for My Father, and what inspired you to write this story about a little girl who doesn't know her father?
Well, again, poetry introduced me to a former inmate on death row by the name of Kenneth Foster. Someone sent a poem of mine to him while he was on death row in the Polunsky unit, and he became a fan of my work, and we started corresponding in 2005. And as I got to know him and learned more about his case, which is a heinous case, it's a law of parties case in Texas. He drove a car away from an unplanned murder that his friend committed, and he was tried alongside the shooter and was sentenced to death at 19. His daughter was 6 months old when he went inside. She watched him grow up, and he watched her grow up with a plate of glass between them. I'm also a teacher I was also a writer in residence at a school in the South Bronx. I was teaching journalism classes and writing classes to young people. And I brought his story into the classroom because I felt that Kenneth really used words in a way that saved his life. With his death sentence was commuted 6 hours before execution due to all the letters that he wrote when he was inside. And there's this poet named Jimmy Santiago Baca who says words can save your life. And I wanted to ask students, do you think this is true? And a lot of them said no. And when I brought Kenneth's story into the classroom, they really realized like that it's not a fantasy. It's actually it's like a literal thing. Like words can actually save your life. And they felt very galvanized by his story, and they started to bring in their own stories of incarcerated fathers, which is something that is not a flag that kids wave, in the school setting. But because we sort of opened the portal into that conversation, and I shared with them my personal friendship with Kenneth, they felt comfortable sharing. I asked them if they would be open to filming their stories because I felt that this was so liberating for them. So many of these students carry around this pervasive shame, which is part of the psychological impact of young people whose parents are locked up, is that stigma that they carry around. What happens if they flip it and they release it and they say, this is my story, and they stand powerfully in their pain, right? And so I found that writing was a great vehicle for the students to do that, as well as film. And the film project, I made 2 shorts, but I wanted to make a feature just focusing on these kids. I wasn't able to do that, so I decided to funnel that fire into a children's book.
That's a beautiful story, and so appropriate because this is something that affects so many of our children.
Some 5 million today, but that's not even to say all of the adult children that grew up with incarcerated parents, right? It's generational.
Yeah.
But yes, there's a lot of children.
And we know that some of us if we don't lose our fathers to actual incarceration as a result of the state, that we walk around in prison in many other ways and are absent in so many ways. And so I was really touched by that. I didn't meet my father, as many of you know, until I was 10 years old. And it reminds me, I'll never forget. In fact, I have, very fond and touching memories of one of my grandmother's best friends. She knew all her life when I was growing up in Nashville, Mrs. Johnson, Minnie D. Johnson, at our church. And I was being raised in the church with my mother and my grandmother there. They raised me in Clark Memorial United Methodist in Nashville. Minnie D. Johnson's husband was one of the United Methodist men, and really have deacons in United Methodist Church. So United Methodists know what I'm talking about. And Mr. Johnson, Hugh J. Johnson, there was a church meeting and I was there. And they were planning, it was an age when I was able to discern a lot of the conversation. So they were planning the annual father-son dinner. And before I could even internalize and realize that I couldn't go, Mr. Johnson was sitting over there to my right, maybe about 10 feet. And he looked over me and motioned to me and he called me over. He said, "You're going with me." And I didn't even have a chance to really feel any type of way or feel bad about it, because and every year he would take me to the father-son dinner, and I always appreciated him for that. And so when I read your book and saw this story, so many children have to go through that pain of absence and loss and don't know what to do with it, do they?
No, it's the ambiguous loss. They don't. It's a story that's too adult or too big for them. And the parent, so many caregivers do not know how to talk about prison. How do you tell a 6-year-old about jail? And, you don't want to just, so it's an identity issue because, jail is where, quote unquote, bad people go. What does that say about your parent, mother or father, that they're in that place? And what does that say about you? So a lot of caretakers, whether it's grandparents or the other parent, really tries to buffer and cushion the child, and sometimes it's silence. And that's the case with my character and her mother. Her mother is silence is her salve, silence is her protection, but our silences will not protect us.
Yeah,
as Audre Lorde says.
A very, very sweet story. I want you all to check it out. Books available everywhere.
Yes, it's available everywhere. It's Penny Candy Books is the press. That's the best place to get it, on the Penny Candy website. But it's also available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all of the outlets.
How can Flora make a Father's Day card for a father she's never known? You all check out the book. Tell everybody where you're going to be in D.C. so they can come hear you.
Yes, I'll be at East City Books in Washington, D.C. At 2 o'clock on Saturday. I will be reading from this book. I will kick a poem. I always like to bring poems into the mix. And I'll read the book, and we'll end with a card-making activity for the kids.
What's next for you? Working on any other projects too?
Yes, I'm working. This is actually a trilogy.
Oh,
so this is the first book in the trilogy. Right now, we don't really discuss prison in this book. It's more so about his absence.
Okay.
But in the second book is when we find out more about her father's story. So the second book is next on deck, which is, so stay tuned.
Little girls need their fathers and little boys need their mothers, that's for sure. Samantha Thornhill, illustrated by Morgan Clement. Great job by Morgan, too, on the illustration. You have your own website?
Yes, my website is samanthaspeaks.com.
Samanthaspeaks.com. And you said you're on Instagram, too.
Yes, I'm on Instagram under Lady Griot, LadyGriot. And you could also find me on Facebook.
You still teaching?
I am hoping to get back into the teaching game. I've been out in the mix for 3 years. I've been traveling the world with my son.
Oh, really?
Working on a series of projects, yeah.
Okay.
So
how old is your son?
3.
Oh, that's all right. That's great.
My little adventure.
No question about it. Well, congratulations on the work that you are doing. And again, folks, here's a book so you can see it. Be sure to check it out on Penny Candy Books by Samantha Thornhill, A Card for My Father. So good to see you, Samantha. Thank you for coming in to see us. Any way we can be supportive, let us know.
Okay.
A very, very touching story. Folks, hope everyone has a great, great weekend. And if all minds are clear, it has been made plain.